Thank you. Well, I've heard so much over these days, and it's been very rich. But I guess I'll just focus on a couple of points. Yesterday, Shayne quoted from Pope Leo's address to us, to the lay associations, movements and ecclesial communities, and this morning Cecilia referenced the same document. I think it's pretty special that our new Pope, in his pontificate, has already addressed us. So I'd encourage everybody to read that document. But the quote that I've heard... Is it working? Yeah. The quote that I've heard repeated at our table discussions and throughout the speakers, I'll quote it for you now. Pope Leo says that unity and mission are two essential aspects of the Church's life and two priorities of the Petrine ministry. For this reason, I ask all ecclesial associations and movements, that's us, to cooperate faithfully and generously with the Pope, above all in these two areas. That's a pretty clear call for us, in unity and mission, to cooperate with the Holy Father and with his representatives in the Church in Australia. So unity and mission. He goes on to say, be a leaven of unity. He's calling us as communities to be a leaven of unity. So to be like yeast, and yeast in flour loses itself. It gets mixed into the flour in order for the bread to rise. And are we prepared to lose ourselves? And I think there is a will here to do that. That's what I've heard, that we'd be happy to lose ourselves a little in order to be unified. We've heard a call from our bishops to be unified with them. We heard yesterday a call for some humanity towards our bishops, along with chocolate and cake and whiskey and wine. Just a little bit of humanity to understand that they have incredible jobs, and it's, they may not be ignoring us. Maybe they're just really overwhelmed and busy. So can we give them a bit of humanity and lean into unity with them? So just building that relationship, listening, solidarity and synodality with each other as well. And that, of course, takes time. And just finally, the second point, mission. A few people have quoted the Mary McKillop words on the side of the tomb where we were, remember we are but travellers here. And that with me. Thank you. Remember we are but travellers here. And it's important to me because I work in pilgrimages and we send people on pilgrimage, and we are just passing through. So we're here for a short time, which means I guess we have to respond with passion and urgency to God's call because our time is limited. And if we don't move for this generation, then who will? So we have to have that urgency. And yet at the same time, we're just passing through, so we need to hold things lightly. All of our missions are important, but they're not everything. And the person that we're sitting next to also has a really important mission. And are we willing to... Am I willing to lose a little bit of my mission to share with Father Chris? So we're here for a short time, we're passing through, so let's look up, look around to each other, towards God, and see the bigger picture and his bigger plan for us. I think that's what I've heard.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Bishop George. So what have I heard? I guess my reflections are probably a little bit more at a macro kind of level, some of the big picture questions, I think, maybe then getting into some of the nitty-gritty realities. I think it's been really wonderful to be together, to listen to one another and receive from one another. think it's been a really prayerful gathering, and I think that might be something that we might take for granted. It's not always the case in other parts of the church, but it's vital, really important. I think the new movements understand the centrality of relationships, of accompaniment, of encounter, and of mission. Different expressions of mission, different charisms at work, but I think, to make a generalisation, I think we get some of those themes, and they've come through really beautifully. I do think there have been some deeper questions underlying the conversations, and what that would mean, I also feel like I've heard a desire for a deeper conversation, another level of conversation at a different level. If I was to sort of pick out some of those questions, I've just chosen 3. A desire for a deeper understanding of the charisms. Secondly, a stronger understanding and a richer dialogue concerning what co-responsibility actually means in both theory and in action. And then thirdly, how do new movements and new communities serve the local church in fidelity to their own charism, but under the bishop and in parishes as well? Aussies, and this was mentioned, Aussies tend to favour really pragmatic answers to these questions. And part of our conversation is that responses to those questions can arise from lived experiences, and at its best, that's a great expression of synodality. But there are also some theological principles to ground us. Synodality is something that happens in time and not just in space. So that means that we really do need to be attentive to the wisdom of the tradition, going back in time, and the magisterium, both past and present, the teaching office of the church, to better inform those conversations. And so just really briefly, there is a rich theology of charisms to be unpacked in our church, and there might be varying levels to which we've done that as individuals or in our movements and communities. There's an emerging theology and magisterial teaching on co-responsibility, and it would serve us well to really dive deeper into that. And thirdly, there is wisdom to be discovered about the theological locus or the location of movements in the church. And this would serve the conversation concerning the relationship of movements with bishops and the role of movements and communities in parishes. Just really briefly, there's a very rich article from he was still Cardinal Ratzinger at that stage before he was elected as Pope, Benedict XVI. That really does locate the movements in relation to Peter's apostolic mission. So the relationship of the Pope to the new movements and communities, John Paul II championed this. Ratzinger finds there's a really strong theological grounding in it, which calls the movements to be apostolic, and that they're sharing in the apostolic mission of Peter and his successors and of the apostles and their successors. So getting that relationship right between bishop and new movement community really matters, but we've got some great resources to draw on for that as well. Lastly, what next? I did hear people wanting to collaborate in mission or create some kind of structure. I just found myself thinking that feels a little bit like Aussie pragmatism rearing its head again. The reality is that everybody is engaged in their mission. You have your own expressions of mission. I'm not sure if we need another structure, but I do think there's a place for an ongoing relationship and dialogue, and you're going to need some kind of structure at a low level, if I can put it like that, the bare minimum of structure to facilitate that dialogue and that conversation, an umbrella kind of gathering like this. But I wonder if that shouldn't be at the service of less formal relationships and support between movements. Movements that have been around for a long time have got some wisdom to share, perhaps with movements that are emerging more recently in the life of the church. Sometimes that's the legacy of hardline experience. So it also, and finally, such a gathering would provide a way to relate to the Bishop's Conference through the Commission for Evangelisation, Laity and Ministry, and that would be valuable.
I'll start with something really very positive. How wonderful to see all of you in here. This is such a joyful incantation here. All the movements of our Catholic Church in Australia are gathered in here and are together. What a joy. Also, I've seen in here that you really already started to build positive relationships. This is where we start. We always start with positive relationships. When you start to walk together, you can't walk with everybody, but sometimes when you start to build the relationships and positive relationships, you can walk with people. And what a wonderful days in here to walk together, to listen to each other's story. Wonderful. We learn how to listen in here. We learn how to walk with one another. I've seen that you've been in dialogue with one another. So you already sort of on the way of a really joyful encounter of Christ. Because we came in here not for our own sort of gratification. We come in here to build around Jesus. We're all for Jesus in here. It's not about me, myself, and I. It's about Jesus. We express things differently, and we walk maybe, sometimes slower, sometimes, faster, and we all appreciate one another in here. So, just wanted to really say that's what I've seen. Beautiful relationships, positive relationships, and you really exhibit some connecting habits, I would say. I would throw a little bit of psychology in here, that's my background. But what I've seen in here, you really develop connecting habits. What are the 7 connecting habits that we use in our daily lives? It's like listening, supporting, encouraging, negotiating, respecting, accepting, and trusting. I haven't seen anything about disconnecting habits in here. We're all trying to support one another. If you exhibit any disconnecting habits, I will notice this, and I haven't. Maybe I haven't been everywhere, but I haven't seen some people sort of exhibiting this disconnecting habits like blaming, criticizing, complaining, nagging, threatening, pushing, or rewarding for control. So I think this is the beginning, and thank you to the Archbishop Franz that he had that dream to really bring you all together. And this beautiful dream has to continue. This beautiful relationship that we built in here, they need to continue in our own regions, I would say. If it's not in a diocese, maybe in the province that we have. There are few dioceses around. Then we meet maybe next year or in the 6th month together again to support one another or to talk about what we have learned from this conference. Where are we going to? How are we going to support one another? Wouldn't it be wonderful to do this in the future? Young and older and all walk together, supporting one another. And I think also you are frustrated in here with some structures. They sort of sometimes don't give life. And I said in one of my groups that sometimes we need to die to something so that some newness can emerge. If we don't die to these old structures, we'll be like, preoccupying the chair of Moses for, forever and ever, so that's on their expression, So we need to think how to bring the newness into our movements. So that's a big question, because we may lose people because of structures. But how about we loosen up a little bit sometimes? Open the little gate, or maybe a little window. Don't shut all the windows. Don't close all the gates and the doors. There is maybe a little window for the youngsters to get into it, maybe. They're different. They always will be different. You were youngsters as well when the people complain about you, but the young ones, they have vibrancy. They bring, when they come, everything's changed, everything is just full of life and excitement. And they bring that. We can bring wisdom, but they can bring joy. The joy of loving Christ. If you allow them really to bring that joy to your communities, you will see, you will be blossoming, in the future. But just engage. Walk with them. Don't criticize them, because we don't want to develop the disconnecting habits. We want to develop the connecting habits. So look at the choice theory. If you want to talk a little bit more about disconnecting habits and connecting habits, they will explain to you what I mean by that. But if I have to summarize this conference in one word, I would say connectedness. That's my word. Thank you.
Well, if the experts are correct, you have 72 hours to make a decision. And what's the decision? Well, that's up to you. But for people attending conferences, the impact lasts about 72 hours. And it can come in one ear and out the other. And what a nice time we had at the conference in Sydney. And it becomes a memory. But if we make a decision, something will actually change. And even if that decision is an internal decision about how I react, respond, relate to another movement, it's a step forward. If I decide I'm going to pray each day for another movement, our hearts are changed. You might have some actions in mind. I'm going to invite one of the people I met on that weekend for a coffee so that I can get to know them better. But let's not let things pass, because I've heard so many positive statements about the desire for more. And it's that desire which is evidenced by a growing relationship. Eyes and ears have been opened. And I think hearts have been opened. And as someone said earlier on, it's the move from competition to collaboration. And we shouldn't be afraid to name those things, because a statement like that is a statement about growth. It's about not holding what we're doing so precious to ourselves that we can't see the fruit and the action of the Holy Spirit in the other. I think with regard to structures and moving forward, it was interesting because after the World Gathering in 1998 of movements and new communities, Pope John Paul encouraged the leaders of those movements to meet one another on a regular basis. But as we all know, life is full and life is captivating of our time. And eventually, the president of the Council for Laity at that time, Cardinal Rilko, finally got involved in helping to facilitate a meeting like that. Not to put a big structure on it, because I don't think we need big structures, but I think we do need some facilitation for us engaging one another on a regular basis. Life has got enough structures. What should be driving us is not a structure, but a commitment, a heart for one another, a heart for the church, a heart for God's mission, which brings us together and which unites us. So, in the last session, I was really impacted by the suggestion that we step back and waste time with one another from time to time. Life is full. But if we don't make time to step back, to encounter, to listen, it's like prayer. If we just keep going and going and going and we forget who we're connected to, what's the point of what we're doing? And, you know, that there are so many similarities between the different movements. Great variety, but similarities. And the great similarity is the heart for God and the heart for God's mission. That's where we find our unity. And sometimes we need to take a step back from all the doing to come back to the foundation. And so, from my perspective and from what I started with yesterday, that sense of communion to collaboration, the outpouring of charisms in their great variety, and the encouragement to keep pursuing those charisms for the service of the church, to building those relationships amongst one another and with our bishops, and finding a way to continue to inspire one another along the journey. I think we've covered a great distance in a very short amount of time, because I believe it's God's grace that takes us there. And it's God's grace that will sustain us each in our own calling and together as movements that the Holy Spirit has raised up in the life of the church. Thank you.